Thank you for being here. We're going to start very soon. As you join the webinar, please go ahead and put your name and affiliation and where you are in the world in the chat so we can start getting a sense of where people are coming from today. Great to start seeing some familiar names here from Greenville, Maine, Margarita, well into the Adirondacks. This is what one thing we love about working at such a big regional scale is seeing the commonalities between all the places and how everyone is dealing with the same issues. So please keep putting that up. We all love to see where you're coming from today. Thank you all for being here. We're going to give people just a couple more minutes to join and then get right into our topic today. We just had a question about whether we are showing the screen of those attending, and we are not. If I understand the question correctly, this is a webinar format in Zoom, so people are just going to be looking at our presenters and their a few slides, and not at all the attendees. And yes, this will be recorded and available afterward, as are all of the webinars in this series. And I think we are ready to get started today. Isabel, if you'll stop sharing screen for a moment. All right, thank you. Thank you all for being here to the 5th episode in the Building the New Forest Future webinar series organized by the Northern Forest Center. The objective of this whole series is really to show some of the themes and similarities between rural communities, regardless of sector. So we've talked about broadband and how to be welcoming and recreation, and today housing, that through all these things, there are some similarities as to how people can address issues, how they can work together, and inspire each other across our big region to make positive change. We are very interested in showing some concrete examples of how that's been done, and our speakers will be doing that today as previously. So the focus today, as you all know, is on housing. We know that lack of quality housing is stifling opportunity across the Northern Forest. I work for the Northern Forest Center. My name is Marla Adams. I'm the Director of Community Investment. And my colleagues and I have been in many, many conversations over the past couple of years, recognizing that how this housing crisis is affecting opportunity for especially young people or workers who may want to move to the Northern Forest and contribute, but can't find housing that meets their needs. I know a lot of you have been in similar conversations, and a lot of times it focuses on the causes of the problem or sort of lamenting, we don't know what to do about it. And so what we want to do today is really focus on ways that some people are directly tackling this issue and what we all might learn from them. So before I introduce our panelists, I want to just create a little bit of clarity on the language and the area of focus for the conversation. So a lot of organizations and programs and funding are specifically for low income families and individuals. And this is it's income restricted and typically defined as affordable housing for official qualification purposes. So we try to avoid using the word affordable because there is a regulatory and often legal definition for what affordable housing means. What we're talking about instead is this middle income sector. So what some people have talked about is the missing middle housing, where it's professionals like nurses and teachers and technicians and public sector workers who don't qualify for income restricted housing, but they also can't afford the luxury homes or condos that private developers seem to be more focused on. So in so many communities, it's this ratio between housing types that's really out of whack. So it's not serving all the types of people that are needed to make a community thrive. And in many places, we need to see a more balanced housing stock ratio. So that's between primary residences, long-term rentals, vacation homes and investment properties, senior housing, seasonal transient housing. A whole bunch of different varieties are needed to allow everyone to live and thrive in a place. And what we're seeing all too often is a division between, in some cases, this income qualified affordable housing and high-end housing and nothing in between. And we're hearing all the time that employers are unable to attract people to work for them because there's no housing, or that they even offer jobs that people have to decline because they can't find a place to live. And that's really what we're trying to tackle, both at the Northern Forest Center and within the groups that are here today, and among many of the things that you on the call are doing. So our speakers are going to talk more about how they define this middle income bracket and how they ensure also that this missing middle housing stays that way indefinitely. So just a couple of comments on what to expect in the next, in the time we have together. Each of our panelists is going to take a little bit of time to explain their program or project. Then I'll facilitate a panel discussion between them with some guiding questions about getting a little more into the details about what they do. Then we'll have some Q&A with all of you. And if you do have questions for any of the panelists, please put them in the Q&A icon on your Zoom screen. And my colleagues will be monitoring that and pulling out some of the questions for our panelists. And we will close around 1:30 and leave you to your days. So I will now, am very pleased to welcome our panelists. And Isabella, if you'll share your screen, I want to just give you all a sense of where they're coming from. We have, I think, our widest geographic spread yet in where our folks are coming from. First is all the way on the west of the Northern Forest is Dan Kiefer-Bach from Living Adirondack. So you'll meet him in just a moment. Then we have my colleague, Laurel, our Director of Finance. And the icons here representing Laurel in the center today are in Lancaster, New Hampshire, right in the middle of the screen, and all the way up in Millinocket in the Maine woods. Susan Bradford from Community Concepts is in Western Maine here. And then all the way to the east is Marla O'Byrne from the Island Housing Trust, right there in the Acadia National Park. So with that, if we could get our panelists on the screen, I'd like you all to see them for a moment. And I think we're gonna start with Marla, introducing yourself and Island Housing Trust and how you start approaching these issues that we're talking about.
Okay, so I am Marla O'Byrne. I'm executive director at Island Housing Trust, and we are a nonprofit that is working to support our year-round communities. And we do that by creating year-round housing opportunities. For us right now, this is home ownership opportunities. And I'd say we've been around for about 20 years, and we have been as creative and adaptable to opportunities as we can. We started by building a neighborhood on land that was donated by one of our towns. We have 4 towns on our island. We have 3 phases. We've completed 2 of those 3 phases and built 9 houses. We put covenants on any homes that we work with, and those covenants ensure that the houses remain affordable to our median income homeowners and remain in year-round occupancy. So we started with building, then we moved on to helping with down payments. We found at some point in 2010 to probably 2019, there were opportunities to buy houses that might be just within range if someone had an adequate down payment. So we started helping with down payments, raising money for that, and putting covenants in exchange for covenants on those properties. We've purchased a house, renovated it, sold it at an affordable price. We've worked with people who are selling their property and wanted to remain in year-round neighborhoods. So we have helped with the purchase of that property at a below market rate by the owners, and invested some of our own money so that that home could then fit within our affordable price range criteria. So I guess the way we've gone about it is we've been as creative as we can and adaptable, and working with many partners, with towns and with our local and statewide land trusts to identify properties and houses. So.
Thanks, Marla. I see there's already some questions coming in. Please do you put those in the Q&A, and we will be monitoring those and getting to them later. But the question that just came in is one that I know everyone's going to be interested in. Thank you, Marla. Let's go to Laurel, Director of Finance for the Northern Forest Center.
Hi, everybody. My name's Laurel Will, and I'm working here at the Northern Forest Center, and our work in housing is relatively new for us. We're about 5-6 years in to this initiative, and we started with an idea in Millinocket to do housing with an investment fund model. And I don't know if we have the slide up yet. There we go. Mm-hmm. So here's a real simple graphic of how the impact fund works. These are, we call them impact investments. They are really very simple loans that people give to the center. We pay interest for 5 to 7 years, maybe 9 years in some cases, and then we repay the principal at the end of that term. So that's step one. An investor comes to us with a nice $100,000 investment. The very first fund we developed was in Millinocket, and we raised $1 million to do property redevelopment in that town. We purchased 6 properties. Some of them were single family and some were multi-unit. We ended up with 11 units. And as part of the plan, we were aware that we would be renovating these properties, probably investing more than a profit-driven developer would do and expect to see a return. So to sort of compensate for that, we decided to stay as owners for 5, 7, 10 years, we're learning as we go, run a rental operation where we would hopefully bring tenants into our properties that would be in that sector that we're all talking about addressing, workforce housing, that middle group, not necessarily affordable, not necessarily high-end, certainly not trying to create any sort of high-end rental market, but really addressing workforce needs. And then we would run this rental operation for, let's say, 5 years in this case. We're using an example of one of our houses where we purchased for $30,000, put $200,000 of renovations into it, rented for 5 years, that's step 4, and netted for the center about $70,000. Step 5, which we haven't gotten there yet, but step 5 involves a family or a young professional purchasing that house, continuing to live there. We also are spending some time thinking about the kind of covenants we'd want to attach to that. And that sale would then allow us to repay our investors. So that's how our very first fund was set up. And we've really used that model to do another local fund in Lancaster, New Hampshire. And then we have launched the Northern Forest Fund, which is a regional fund to do the same work all across our 4-state region. We've already had some success paying back some of our shorter term investors. We've experienced some success in Millinocket with both low vacancy rates, higher than expected rents, and interest in purchasing our properties already, supported by increasing housing prices in that area. So we feel like this model, even though we haven't played it out to the end where we've sold properties and repaid all of our investors, we feel that at this point, the monitoring that we've done indicates that that we're on a good path, and our very conservative pro formas are working out so far. Next slide, please. So this is just for a visual example. This is a property that we purchased in Millinocket. We purchased it off the tax rolls and have fully renovated it. Each floor is a separate apartment. So I think we have a 1, 2, and a 3-bedroom apartment on each of the different floors. And again, we've been successful in renting these units to new people to the area, sometimes to existing tenants. We don't discriminate. We're not looking only for young professionals new to the area, although that is kind of our target market. But we have, so this is 3 of our 11 units are in this building. And as I said, we've experienced very good occupancy rates and what we think are reasonable and affordable, but also financially successful rents for the center. And one more slide. We did a slightly different type of project in Lancaster, New Hampshire. Here we purchased this building at the end of the block called the Parker J. Noyes building. It housed a pharmaceutical company that was the creator of the sugar-coated pill. So it has a little bit of a place in history. And we did a renovation to this building that included commercial space on the first floor, 6 apartments, 3 each on the second and third floor. We did a number of historically accurate things to this building, and we received money from a couple different funding sources in support of that. Recently won a little award from the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance for the historical renovation of this building. One of the things that's really notable from this picture is you can see that we repositioned the windows to be historically accurate. There's a bunch of cool things inside the building, some old clapboards and flooring that we reused, some old doors that we were able to renovate and reuse. So every space in the building has something of historical significance, which is kind of fun. This building is almost finished on the construction side, and we have, I think, almost all of our tenants lined up for hopefully June 1st occupancy on the second and third floors. The first floor retail space may take a little bit longer to be finished. We have a very patient and wonderful partner at Taproot Environment. I'm going to get the whole thing wrong. Anyhow, she's a local food marketplace that currently has a very small space down the street, and is going to be able to move into this entire first floor with a commercial kitchen, a much larger retail space. It will support the root cellar, which is one of many different activities she does from her nonprofit. So she's been a great partner, and that's also been something we've identified as sort of a good key to success, is having a local partner that can help you both fundraise for the project, but also keep a lot of enthusiasm in the community. And I think I'll stop there and talk more later as we get into the Q&A section.
Thanks, Laurel. We will head to Western Maine next. Susan Bradford directs housing programs for Community Concepts. And she's going to talk in particular today about the self-help home ownership program that brings together multiple families who agree to build each other's homes together. So taking a very different approach to this issue that makes housing more attainable. So Susan, thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Hi, everybody. Yes, I do work for Community Concepts. I've been there 15 years, and Community Concepts has been doing the self-help model for 30. We turned 30 this year, so we've done about 240 homes. For that particular program, we do partner with USDA, and what we do is we group families of 6, and a family can be a single person. It's up to them. We build a model house. It's a 3-bedroom ranch. We stick with that one house style for ease of building, because we don't require any skills, no knowledge of building, nothing, just a good attitude. And we provide the tools. We provide a site supervisor that's there during the weekends, which is when our groups work, typically 10 hours on Saturday, 10 hours on Sunday. They do this. It takes a little over a year to build the 6 homes. Everybody moves in on the same day. We do that so to keep the motivation up. And we also have them agree. We have them sign a legal binding document that they agree to build each other's homes. And nobody, like I said, will move in until all 6 of them move in. Once they sign that document, they agree to put the hours in. They agree to do basically what the site supervisor says, although he is very accommodating. We often have people that don't like heights, and we find jobs for everybody. And you don't have to have that knowledge of building. We will find something that, he breaks down tasks very small so that people can do it very well. It is a legally binding agreement though, so at the end of the project, that agreement dissolves. People are able to move into a home that will cost them much less than if they would just go purchase the same exact home, because they have done so much of the work themselves. They do all the woodwork, the framing, the roofing, the windows, the doors, the insulation, the painting, the siding, all that stuff is homeowner participation. So that usually gets them. Our last house that we had appraised with this market, they are going to end up with about $60,000 worth of equity in their home, which is amazing. We do have them do an association. They collect dues. There's a few things that they pay out of that due thing. One of ours is disposal of sheetrock, some temporary heat, some things like that that come out of there. And at the end of the build, they dissolve that. Any funds that are left over, they can do whatever they'd like to, divide them amongst themselves, or pizza parties, whatever they want to do. The sweat equity is the biggest portion of this. And the timeline is totally homeowner driven. People are allowed to go out and do extra time during the week. They just need to let the site supervisor know. And that happens quite a bit. And we really recommend that people bring volunteers to get in all that work. And as long as somebody's at least 16 years old, we welcome them and we'll teach them to do that. So that's really a good portion of that. We do also during the building process and before building, we do what we call pre-construction classes. And those are classes that we teach basic home ownership skills, budgeting, credit, insurance. We also talk about proper use and care of a septic system, maintaining your house, breaking down all the different things that need maintenance on that house. And the things that people, they have skills when they move in. So we try to encourage them more to do a lot of stuff themselves so that they're not paying somebody else and keeping that money in their pocket. We also do, we put all the contractor work out to bid. And that's something that we publish in the paper, and anybody's welcome to come and bid on the jobs. And what they do is, if you're a heating professional, you have to have the licenses and the insurances and all that. You can bid on the project and you get all 6 houses. So you're not bidding on one, you get all 6, which makes it nice for our contractors. They're easy to do. You know, they hit the ground running, they've got all the materials right with them. So they really like the program too. Plus they believe, you know, they like the sweat equity portion of it and helping people do that. They don't make payments during the building process. Their first payment is due within about 30 days after they move in. The funds for the building, we keep in a big national fund, and as we need them, we pull that out and they start paying interest on those funds as we use them. We do require them to buy a homeowner's insurance policy with a builder's risk addendum, which protects them from liability if somebody gets hurt on the site, also protects them from theft of materials, general liability, and they have to purchase that whole policy for a year. Depending on the length of the build and when they started building, then sometimes they are required to buy a second year's homeowner's insurance. At that point, once they start making payments, it's escrowed with their property taxes, so they don't have to do that. Yeah, so I think that's about the biggest thing.
Just a little bit, just a few easy home building projects. Thank you, that's wonderful. And I know there's going to be a lot of questions about that too. We're going to wrap up our introductions with Dan Kiefer-Bach from Living 80K out in the Old Forge area of the Adirondack Park on the western side of the park. Dan, go for it.
Hey, how you doing? I wanted to start real quickly by saying a little bit about the region. We are a string of pearls along a Fulton chain of lakes of small communities with limited year-round populations and 4 different counties within about a 10-mile stretch of one road. So the biggest success as a region, and the first thing I would point out, is if you don't have somebody that's working on housing and is paid to do so, that would be number one. It'd be like trying to work on any other infrastructure with volunteers or committees. Imagine a department of public works or a highway department, run by volunteers. It would be very difficult to get anything done. So if you don't have a specific person either in your governance or on the not-for-profit side focusing on housing, that would be number one. The second unique thing about Town of Webb and the region itself is that in the Adirondack Park, there's not a lot to develop on. A lot of the solutions that were being pitched are about development, building. I know that that's everybody's first instinct is, hey, we want to build houses. But the first thing that we were tasked with is looking at, would more housing stock actually change the issues that we're running into as a resort community with very limited land to build on per se. So Maura, can you throw up the slide that shows the housing ratio? Awesome. So as you can see here, the first thing was changing the conversation in the region of, what the actual issue is. And we kind of talked about before about that pie chart of the different types of housing. And as you can see here, the biggest thing here is not that we don't have enough housing stock, it's that we don't have enough of it where we've got year-round residents living in those communities. And that's something you can't necessarily build your way out of. So we needed to get creative and say, how do we start to convert some of these vacant units, which are seasonal units or short-term rentals, investment properties, back to a more healthy housing ratio with more long-term rentals and more owner-occupied units, which is, primary folks living there primarily. And so if you want to slope the next slide, Maura. Looking at with very limited resources, we started looking at across the country. Looking in the Adirondack Park is important and geographically is important, but so too is looking at other communities that have similar economies to you and similar housing situations as you do. This will be shared, so do go through those links. But these are some examples of housing density programming that's being done in other parts of the country. That is not necessarily legislative, and it is not necessarily based upon builds. Some of them might work for our community, and some of them may not, based on how unique it is. So we focused on the deed restriction one right there, which is based on a program in Vail, Colorado, which essentially pays existing homeowners or soon to be homeowners to encumber their property. The encumbrance is very simple, that the person residing in that home is a primary resident of that location. The idea being that we would like to earmark about 20% of the homes in our community to a primary year-round resident. And that way our economy is stabilized, our volunteer ambulance corps stabilized, volunteer fire department, you get the picture. It's a very simple program. Existing homeowner can submit to us how much they think it's worth to voluntarily encumber their property. So for some people, it might be worth $2. For other people, it might be worth $20,000. We're able to pay for that. We have a boilerplate deed restriction that is placed on the deed. They basically have to sign the paperwork. And at that point, anytime the deed changes hands, legally, the person that is accepting that deed must be a primary resident. Why this is really powerful tool. The first is that it can be combined with a lot of other programs. So for instance, we heard about a down payment assistance program. The first two people that have reached out to us about this program, and much of the folks in Vail that have used it, have been people that want to buy a home, need down payment assistance. So they're willing to say, hey, if you pay me $10,000 or $15,000, I'm going to use that towards the down payment of my house. We've now applied this boilerplate deed restriction that stays with the house in perpetuity. And this way we're making a multi-generational change by keeping that house a home and not allowing it to be converted into an investment property. It can be used as a buyback program for folks that want to turn a short-term rental into a long-term rental, or to sell to a family in the community. So there's really versatile uses. The last thing that's really interesting is it's entirely a voluntary program, and it's entirely a market program. So we're not legislating this. It's a person that could use the funds. It's self-selective. So most of the folks are going to be in that middle banding, as we talked about before. And the last wonderful piece of it is that it is relatively inexpensive compared to a build. To pay a homeowner to encumber their property $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 or $50,000 or $100,000, although it might seem very expensive, is much less expensive than the build cost of putting up an apartment complex or all new single family dwelling units. So the return on investment can be quite wonderful. So I will leave it at that.
Thank you. Isabella, could you put us all on the screen at this point? So there's so much going on with all of your questions and conversations and programs. It's hard to even know where to start, but I'd like to actually start with knowing whether you have questions for each other. What has come up? You're each so immersed in this work. What have you heard as experts in this space that you are curious about knowing what the others are doing?
So I have a question about deed restrictions, because that's something that we're starting to work on. Yep. We've seen a few good models from places like Habitat for Humanity. And for us, it would be a different kind of deed restriction than what you've worked on in the Adirondacks. But we've been, thinking about how we can craft a deed restriction that prevents a future seller from selling it to someone who's going to turn it into an Airbnb or something like that, because we really are in a lot of very attractive vacation communities. But we also want our sellers to be able to maintain their ability to grow their own financial wealth through home ownership, like most people can. So I'm curious how you balance some of those different needs and how much lawyering was needed to get there.
I could field that from this side of things. Our deed restriction program has no cap on the resale value of the home. That is for simplicity's sake, but for a couple of reasons. What we find is that there's lots of things increasing the market valuation of the homes, but the biggest thing is a conversion of a valuation of a home from a house valuation to a business valuation. So let's think about it this way. If you've got your family in your house, it might be a $250,000 house. But if I buy that house and I can carve out $5,000 a year to turn that into a vacation rental, and I value that as a business, that's a $500,000 business. So you're pulling that housing stock. Not only can a person not purchase that unit, but you're now putting it into a business venture. You're taking it off the market and overvaluing it. So by simply making the deed restriction that it must be a primary resident that's living in that home, you're automatically deflating it. You're moving it and keeping it as a home valuation as opposed to an investment valuation. The other part of that is that when you go to resell the home, because you are shrinking your target market of who's actually capable of buying that home, you're going to decrease the valuation in the home by, in Vail, they found about 10 to 15% is how much less those homes sold versus homes that did not have a deed restriction on it. And that's just artificial because the person that's buying it, you can't sell it to a snowmobiler or a boater, somebody that's coming in. So you're just, shrinking the amount of Vail buyers. And so that was, it sort of was self-corrective in that way. There was no pressure to say, there's only 10% or 20%. It's just, as long as the primary resident, it's creating that economic pressure, I guess.
Marla, just unmute.
Got it.
There you go. Thanks.
Yeah, I would say in a different approach, Island Housing Trust did work on creating covenants where the covenants include a resale formula that determines what the price of the house can sell for. And we begin with what the house was purchased for. If IHT put any money into it, we back out that amount. So if it was purchased at $200,000 and we put in $20,000 to help with the down payment, their base price for beginning to calculate what they can sell it for would be $180,000. Then we look at what the median income was when they purchased and what the median income is the year that they're selling. And let's just assume it's an increasing wage because that's the world we want to live in. And it's the one we've had for the past couple of decades. So it increased 10%. That means the value of their house increases 10% for resale. And then we add improvements, eligible improvements. Not everything is eligible. They put in a swimming pool. We are not going to include that as an improvement to the house because it's not a functional improvement in the sense of needed. So we look at base price purchase, change in median income, eligible improvements, and that determines what they can sell the house at. But we also have a cap, and that's based on a formula that looks at what is the median income, what is the percentage we allow as an eligible income, and we have a real estate factor of 2.5 to 3%. It's just gone up. And it can't go above that price. So it's kind of complicated, but it's intended to have the price of the homes track median income in our area.
Thank you. Susan, any comment from you on maintaining this? Okay. All right, we've had a number of questions come in about financing and how these, well, a number of questions about how we can make how these projects can work. So I'm interested, Susan, how does the funding model work for your program?
I have 3 programs, and there is 2 different funding sources. The building program that is through, there's one through USDA Rural Development, and we get grants. We get a grant, the company does, and we have for 30 years to run that program. So that's what supports staff and equipment and overhead for that program. And then rural development writes the loans. They don't require down payments. It is an income restricted program, although it's a higher income than a lot of people will make. I do help out teachers. I think my last group had 3 teachers and a medical counselor. So I'm hitting that kind of what you guys seem to be going for. Not the doctor people, but the next step down, at least for around here in Western Maine. And the building, I have one program that's specifically building houses. We're just starting it in the Lewiston and Auburn district only. And that is going to, the money to run it is a CDBG grant. And the money for the homeowners is going to be a straight up financing with a local credit union. They've agreed to not require them to make payments during the building process. Their loans will be closed. And when that happens, it's going to be the money for the land, money for all the building, no other, it's going to be direct housing costs though. So that's how we do ours. Sometimes we'll pull in some funds from other national funders, like Housing Assistance Counseling has what they call a SHOP fund. And that's money that you can apply for, that if the organization owns the property for any length of time, it's for development of the property. So like infrastructure, that kind of stuff. And then once you sell that to the new homeowner, you are required to pay, well, we get $15,000 for each house, and we're required to pay $1,500 back to the Housing Assistance Counseling. So that's $13,500 that we can use. A lot of times it gets recirculated. If somebody sells their property, then and they make money, they're required to repay whatever that was that we put into their home project. So then we have recycled or repooled money that we can be less, we can use it at our discretion.
Thank you. So one thing I'm gathering from everyone is that having some expertise in putting complicated stacks of money and funding sources together is a really big challenge. And you know, developing that expertise, perhaps having it on staff, as Dan had suggested. How do you get somebody actually in-house who knows these things inside and out, or can figure them out as you go? Laurel, could you talk a little bit about the capital stack we've used, especially for Parker J. Noyes? How, and I think there was a question specifically about using tax credits for projects like this. So definitely touching on that element.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. In our first fund in Millinocket, we were able to finance almost all of our work with our investor fund. In Lancaster, it was much closer to 50-50 as far as using our debt financing raised from impact investments, and the other 50% coming from what we sort of lumped together as gifts and grants. And gifts and grants came from all over the place. And this is sort of the complex part of our capital stack. Private foundations, individuals. We did some cool crowdfunding campaigns to allow for, you know, lots of different, especially local participation on the fundraising side. But some of the bigger chunks came from some foundation grants, again, to support some of the historical work. We have one federal source, which again, that's always a little bit complicated because when you bring federal money in, you have different kinds of encumbrances on the building. So we have to be just very careful that that's what we want to do. And that is something we decided to do for Parker J. Noyes. We also did pursue 2 different types of tax credits. We received a allocation of New Hampshire state tax credits, which we then went out and sold, again, to a lot of you know, businesses all over New Hampshire, but in particular, we had participation from some Lancaster businesses, which was really fantastic. And then I'd say the most complicated funding we went after was new market tax credit financing, which is a federal program. And we worked with a partner that we like to call MHIC, they're Massachusetts Housing Investment Corp. they received a tax credit allocation from the government, which meant they secured a tax credit purchaser, which was one bank purchased all of the tax credits. But then we had to, what was complicated about the process is each organization had lawyers and there were lots of rules we had to follow, lots of kind of things we had to check off about our project, and quite a bit more due diligence than we had to do on any of our projects in Millinocket. So it was a big learning curve for us. We had been involved helping other projects receive NMTC financing, but we had never been the recipient, and that is just a completely different set of things you have to do. I think it was a super worthwhile exercise, not just for the big chunk of money it brought to that project, but we now have some in-house expertise that we hope to apply to other projects. And frankly, some really good best practices that we're going to follow whether we bring in this kind of financing or not. So it was a just jumbo package learning experience that we went through on a kind of it felt like a long time, but it was a pretty short timetable. So yeah, I mean, we could spend a whole webinar probably talking about NMTC, and I don't think I'd offer myself as the expert, but I've got a lot of low-level experience in various parts of the process. So,
Marla, could you talk a bit about funding for your projects?
Island Housing Trust is primarily funded through private donations from individuals and foundations. We have recently been getting more support from all of the 4 towns on the island and completed a capital campaign. Our businesses support us. We're trying to build that in our local community. Foundations, we do have foundation support. And there are more opportunities coming up in the state of Maine. So we are looking at ways that we can tap into some of the ARP funding from the pandemic relief funding. One of our challenges has been that Island Housing Trust has worked with households that earn up to 160% of median income, and that makes us ineligible for most, if not all, state and federal funding. We recently, with a new neighborhood we were planning, we recently looked at what were the actual incomes of the buyers over the years that we've worked, and we saw that the majority of our buyers earned 120% or less. And if we acknowledge that in our criteria, that does make us eligible for funding from other sources. So that's what we have done, is we've lowered our eligible income criteria for this newest project we're doing. And I'm hoping that we'll find additional support.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Back to Laurel for a second. Someone had a question about, I think you were referring to bringing resources to the table with the Northern Forest Fund. Could you just explain a little bit more about the fund and the source of those contributions? You mentioned it a little bit in the original when you introduced yourself with our diagram, but if you could say just a little bit more about what those resources are, what we're bringing to the table, I think that would be helpful.
So you mean what we're bringing to the table from the Northern Forest Fund?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So the Northern Forest Fund is our third fund, and it's really sort of the new model that we would hope to sort of stick with. It's regional across all 4 states, as opposed to being targeted specifically to one community. And the fund it's a very different kind of a capital campaign to raise these funds. We have a philanthropic portion, which is sort of your traditional capital campaign with gifts. That is primarily to support what I would call our more traditional Northern Forest Center programming in communities, not our property work, but it's complementary to our property work, in that we do a lot of these things side by side in a single community. So we're trying to address the property issues on the one side, but also this philanthropic portion of the fund can address other programming needs that might exist in a community. On the property side, we have $12 million as our goal for that regional fund. We hope to spread it across 10 communities. And we expect it to serve as a catalyst. So each investment in a property will take a portion of our Northern Forest Fund proceeds on the investment side. We'll hopefully also draw in other types of fundraising for an individual project, kind of like what we experienced in Parker J. Noyes, where the project itself lent itself to some very specific types of fundraising to support that project. So the combination of that type of fundraising plus the Northern Forest Fund will support these projects that we hope to have across the 4 states. We have a number that are already in the pipeline that are in, we haven't, I don't believe we've purchased anything outright yet. I think I would know. But we do have a number that are under very serious due diligence and review. The idea with the fund is that, again, it's very similar to that little diagram I showed at the beginning, where the fund goes in to help with the purchase and renovations. The property, then we can use it as a rental property for a period of time to help us recoup some of that renovation cost. And then we will sell the properties, which will allow us to repay our investors, or if the investors would like to stay in the fund, then reuse those funds for additional projects. I don't know if that exactly was answering your question, Maura, or not, but that's kind of the idea of the fund.
Yes, that's helpful. And I was trying to translate someone's question from the Q&A, and I hope I did that well. So let's see, lots of questions coming in, and I am so appreciative of the dialogue, and probably will not get to all of them. But Dan, I'm interested in hearing from you. There's, given your experience, not just in the Adirondacks, but also your familiarity with programs around the country, some of how people are using different kinds of housing in some ways to make this work. So one is, where are people using like tiny houses for workforce housing, or accessory dwelling units, adding an in-law apartment or something like that, or even let's say there's a big old house, can you convert that to a 2 or 3 family to use existing space a little differently, and potentially requiring some kind of zoning changes, stuff like that. But what are some creative ways that people are repurposing space in existing buildings?
So I don't want to speak outside of something that I know about. So I'll focus on the accessory dwelling units a little bit.
Great,
in how it interplays with this deed restriction program that I'm kind of harping on a little bit. Why the deed restriction program is really interesting is because you can leverage it for accessory dwelling units to ensure that people, if you relax your zoning regulations, in exchange for that, that ability to build a secondary house or an accessory dwelling unit, this person has to enroll that accessory dwelling unit within the deed restriction property, the deed restriction program, so that way that unit is not turned into a cabin or a rental space or something that is an investment property. And I know that in Vail, they have been talking about the interplay between those, the zoning and the use of the program. At this point, I think they've got about 340 units, houses that are enrolled in the program, so that have this voluntary encumbrance. And so they're sort of the, this program's been going on for quite some time, and they're hitting a capacity of just people voluntarily joining the program. So the next step for them is to start to give these added incentives, such as accessory dwelling units, in order to incentivize folks to come forward and densify their housing stock. So I don't know if that answers it, but.
Yeah, no, thank you. We had kind of a similar, or another question about the deed restrictions. They're, needing to be sold only to existing or current residents, but is there any consideration or exception for former residents, especially maybe young professionals who are looking to return home?
Yeah, so again, the simplicity of the program is in that there's not lots of structure to it. There's not a lot of, there's nothing that says who can apply and offer us how much it's worth to them. So as the housing market shifts and fluctuates, we as a committee and us as an organization can make decisions as to who to extend the program to. Is this because you're purchasing a portion of real estate effectively? A person could come to us with a $600,000 house and say, hey, I want 10% of the valuation of my home. That might not be a good purchase for us. That might be the wrong market. And so because it's voluntary, we could say, sorry, we're not going to compensate for you for it. But if you want to voluntarily encumber it, here you go. So again, it's very flexible in who your target is. So, if there's a person moving back to town and they wanted to purchase a house in the community, we're the first ones to reach out to them and say, hey, we've got some down payment assistance money for you right here. It does come with some strings attached, but this might be your vehicle to get back home.
Thank you. So I don't want to steer the entire conversation. Wondering if anything else has come up for you all to ask each other in the conversation we've been having.
I have a question. I think I'm just curious about scope. I know that we have addressed this question from a lot of our funders and impact investors, like how much of a difference can you make with your one building or your 6 apartments or your 10 houses? And our feeling is that, and so far in the 2 communities that we're active in, we actually have seen, especially in Lancaster recently, there have been a couple other big purchases of buildings downtown with plans to renovating and kind of create some better apartments and all of that. But I would be curious to hear the rest of the panelists kind of address scope and how they feel their funding and their program is as impactful as possible, even if you can't build 1,000 houses.
I guess I would say it's a question we are asked and we ask ourselves frequently. I think, if we weren't doing it, nobody would be doing it. So that's one way we look at it. I'd like us to be doing so much more. We hold covenants on 37 houses, but I have plans for us to double that within the next 5 years. So what I'm seeing too is that what we do, I talk with organizations that are gearing up all along the coast in Maine, because communities are seeing that there is an approach to address the dwindling stock of year-round housing. And each community does it differently, but the conversations have really been growing over the past 2 years. And I think that I don't look at the number of houses we have here as being representative of just what we do. I think it's how it's growing everywhere. And I think it's a momentum. So we're building momentum, we're getting some leverage, and I like to think that we will have a significant impact on making sure that we have people to teach, to sell us groceries, to keep our communities resilient. But yeah, it's a difficult, because people like numbers and they like to know what is the impact. And I think with covenants, however you approach them, and deed restrictions, you are looking at creating solutions that will carry on for years and can be built on. That's what I would say.
Thanks, Marla.
Yeah.
How about you, Susan?
Well, I myself personally do our scope with when I go to the grocery store and I see one of my homeowners and they're with their mother that also did our program and their niece that also did this program, and it's generational. With 30 years, I'm hitting my 3rd generation of folks. We also estimate that over 100 different people touch this project. Local people, from plumbers to the people that cut down the trees to the landscape. There's so many people, the title company, everybody, it's creating jobs all over the place, just in the kind of places that we want people to live. I do have contractors that have done my program, and people that have heard about it through their work because they were helping with it also go through and do this. So what my scope looks at it from that kind of a point. You know, we all, I think most of us know that when somebody purchases a home, it really stabilizes a big portion of their life. I get lots of calls, probably 2 or 3 a day now, of people that their landlord's selling their home that's a rental home. So if you can take somebody that's whatever their job is and put them in someplace they don't have to worry about if they're going to be told to move in 30 days or 60 days, that really stabilizes them, and that stabilizes their family. We've seen increases in children's grades and their performance in school, also their, you know, emotional stability. I have a lot of folks that have autistic children and children, like, you know, I don't know, the scope of it is huge. It's all, you know, if you want to look at the money and the numbers, or if you want to look at the people and the quality of life, I sort of go with the quality of life, but that's just me. Other people look at the numbers.
No, I think that's a great answer, Susan. And one we've given a lot of thought to, and how do you combine the quantitative numbers for the people who need that with all these stories, which sometimes feel more impactful. And there may be, we're sort of concocting as a staff future webinar topics, and one of them may actually be developing measures of success. How do communities, how are they doing over time, and how are any of these interventions making a difference, if at all? And so stay tuned for that. That may happen. We might be tapping some of you who we know are working on that kind of thing for a future webinar.
Could I just add one thing? One of the ways IHT has worked hard to remind ourselves and to remind our communities that the work we do isn't simply to benefit people, it's our benefit as well. So we consistently make the message that we need these people. They are giving back to us. And so we created a poster that has a map of where we live and shows where the houses are throughout the island, and then where we work. And it's a list of all the businesses where people work. And that kind of gives a visual of, here's the impact to our community. Here are the people where they're working and where we see them and we are benefiting.
I really like that. Yeah, that just triggered some ideas for me about how to talk about impact. So something I want to ask everyone that just came up also in the chat, but it has also been on my list, was both how did you start your program, but also what are you telling other people about how they might do something similar? So like Marla, you said you're talking to people all along the coast. I know others have been doing something similar, and that's a big question. So how could anybody on the call, like, what are the first steps? Dan, do you want to start?
Sure, I can start. Because our program is a voluntary deed restriction program, and we've at Living 80K have translated what's been successful in Colorado and in Michigan and other states to a legal, boilerplate deed restriction here in New York State. I am more than happy to send that legal boilerplate deed restriction to anybody who wants to use it. And you can start tomorrow. You can literally walk over to your neighbor's house and say, hey, I've got this document right here. It costs about $500 for a lawyer. So if you can raise some legal fees or have a slush fund, and you can offer this program for no compensation whatsoever. And there might be folks that as a result, they see what's happening in their communities. They want to put their house into a legacy program. They may say, okay, give me that. Let's do this today. So it doesn't necessarily require high levels of competency, and doesn't necessarily require high levels of monies. Of course, people like to get paid. So, if you can raise some funds to compensate them for, that's you're going to increase the basis of it. But mine is is build it from the ground up. I'm very much grassroots. You know, let's look at solutions that don't necessarily require large pots of money and that require large pots of expertise. So email me, I'll send it over to you and start knocking on doors.
That is great and very direct. Yeah, and please do, we will send our panelists contact information afterward if they don't mind, as well as, yeah, I like if you're willing to send this deed restriction, we can include that as well. Marla, how about, or Susan, how about you? What would you recommend that somebody do if they're trying to start a program like yours, which, as far as I know, is unique to the region?
The self-help housing program is USDA, and it is a national program. We're the only one. We used to be the only one north of Pennsylvania that did it. But my understanding is there's been some folks, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, that have picked up this model. There's another side to it, which is the purchase and rehabilitation program, where we help people buy existing homes, do any necessary repairs. There's also sweat equity that they need to put into that, but the same nice financing. I think a really good place to go and look for answers is NeighborWorks. They're a national teaching about helping people, whether it be housing, you know, heating assistance, or, you know, there's financial stuff on small businesses. It's across the board. That's a good place for a lot of resources. Another one, of course, would be USDA, the website. You can go right on there and look how to apply for a 523 grant. Excuse me, I do know that they are accepting applications for that at this time. So that would be another avenue for people. Getting in touch with the Housing Assistance Counseling and inquiring about their SHOP funds. Again, another one. And if you didn't want to get, you know, ideally, if it was me and I won the lottery and had a lot of money, I'd just I'd set up a private fund and do it myself and not have to deal with all of that, as you know, Laurel, red tape, black tape, whatever. It's just mind-boggling. Luckily, I have lots of good people that know that stuff. But it's out there. Just keep asking questions to different people and, you know, call them up. What can you do for me?
Persistence and good networks, for sure. Laurel, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm not always the idea person. I'm more of the executor person. but some things that big takeaways from the projects that we've started. I think your local group is important. Getting a group of people, local leaders, people who can speak for maybe the municipality, the realtors, some big employers, but also some other local business owners, you know, people that have their finger on the pulse of what's making their community, what's driving their community, what the needs are, and can help identify the right approach for that community. Because I think that's what we're trying to do across our region, is recognize that not every town is like Millinocket, and not every town is like Lancaster, and they have different needs. They need different kinds of housing. Maybe they need a commercial rehab. Maybe they need some, you know, straight up new construction. I think that the needs are unique, and finding the group of people that can really come together and brainstorm and think about those needs is really crucial, and as local as possible, in my opinion. Fundraising capacity, like whatever it is, whether, you know, there's lots of different models we've talked about here. You can do it based completely on individual donations. You can do it with government money, but they're completely different types of projects. So figuring out where your capacity is, what kind of fundraising you can do, is going to kind of point you in the direction of what your project's going to look like. And then, you know, the piece that I can definitely speak to is you do need to have some financial management skills on board, because the funding sources, even if they seem pretty straightforward, construction, housing, it's just complicated. And having someone who's willing to sort of dig into that side of it, kind of the back end, and understand how to put those pieces together and stay mission focused, I think is really helpful. And I'd say in every single community that we've had some success, we've had some connection with local employers, and that can not only help you define the need, but they often are the need. They have employees that they're trying to house and entice to the region, and so they can become funders in addition to partners. They can become tenants. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Laurel. And Marla, you've obviously given some thought to this question. If you're advising other communities on how to do it, what's your advice?
So I'll start with how we started, and that came out of a community visioning session that was led by the University of Maine's Cooperative Extension. And it brought together the 4 towns to ask the communities, what do you value about Mount Desert Island in your town? What do you worry about? And what do you hope for in the future? And out of that came workforce housing. And that's where we started. And we looked for, I guess, probably the low-hanging fruit. We looked at an organization that existed but had gone dormant. So we worked with them to revitalize it. We looked at the towns and properties they might have so that they could participate early for us to get started. And we were donated 10 acres of land to work with. We were able to work with an architect who'd won the Maine State Housing Green Building Award in 2006, and we were able to use that design for our houses. So it really is looking at where are the opportunities in your community. But coming out of the grassroots, the other thing we knew is we needed to be able to describe what is the issue. So we contracted a housing study. So we could give the message, we could both design our work so that it would be what the community needed, but we could also then give the message. We could quantify things. So I think working closely with the community, you've heard that throughout, and I agree. Every community has its own needs and its own character. And so trying to keep the community engaged and addressing what's needed there, and looking at the natural partners who might be out there and quantifying what it is you're trying to do.
That leads directly into my next question. You teed that up nicely, which is from Ticonderoga, New York, wondering what kind of data you needed to develop this to make the case, and how you went about getting accurate data on housing usage and availability. And I'm curious to hear from others as well how you may or may not use data for behind your work. But starting with Marla.
So we wanted to know who owns houses on MDI. What is the median income here? What is the median house price? What has been the change over the past decade or 15 years? We hired a consultant and they used publicly available information to compile. What can people afford? How many people are missing out? How many people are commuting onto the island? Because to get onto MDI, there's a 2-lane highway and that's it. And so our drive time from 7 miles away can be as long as an hour in the summer. And that's impacting our businesses. What is the impact to businesses? So we interview businesses to understand what is the issue for you to attract and retain employees? What are you seeing? We did our second housing assessment in 2018, and it's a whole different world already. So that's one of the challenges of data, is you have it to use for about a year. And then if you have a pandemic, it's just irrelevant. So yeah, it's identifying what the challenges are and where they exist and what's the scale and scope.
Thanks. And Dan, what's been your experience with any kind of housing analyses and using data to inform this work?
Yeah, so we're very fortunate that Town of Webb had commissioned a housing study to be done by a consultant to produce the types of things that Marla was talking about, and just to give us a general scope of exactly what the issue was. As a region, I think that all of us know what the problems are, but knowing exactly how bad it is sometimes could be a bit jarring. So I think data definitely is important, but I would also caution, you know, a lot of you probably intuit and know what the issues are. And a lot of times when I do talk to other folks in other parts of the country, you know, data collection can be wonderful, but it also can be a stand-in for picking out things of dragging your heels, why we can't do this, why this might not be successful. Oh, well, this solves, you know, 20% of our problem, not 100% of our problem, so let's not do it. So definitely have data-driven solutions, but also don't be afraid to pull the trigger and move on something. If you know what the issue is, you know, don't allow that to be a point of bottleneck and of inaction. Because if you know what the problem is, sometimes you know what the problem is.
Yes, yes. So I think you all are, just looking around, everyone on the screen is associated with a nonprofit. And I'm wondering whether, how you see a town or a municipality, what's their role? What's the role and responsibility for a town or city in this work? And what's the role of the private sector, and how do those relationships work? Who wants to take that? I know in the center's work, we've seen some interesting partnerships, but I'm interested in hearing from everyone. But Laurel, do you want to start?
Yeah, I definitely don't put myself out there as an expert, but I know that in each of the communities, including the ones where we're looking to, we're reviewing potential projects, that town partnership is crucial. And it's something that I think needs to be, you need to have a positive relationship in place in order for a lot of different types of redevelopment to be successful. So, and you know, my experience, and maybe that's just because I get brought into the projects once we've already sort of, you know, chosen a community, is that they have been super supportive, and they've helped with logistics, with sewer hookups, with sidewalk rebuilding, with planning and thinking, and you know, the gamut of issues. But I know that interaction between our on the ground staff and the town is pretty continuous. Like it's not just like, oh, we'll check in with them when we need something. They're ongoing partners in a pretty like month to month, week to week way. So I don't know if that exactly gets at it, but I think I see Marla nodding her head. So
yeah.
And what about the private sector? So Marla, if you want to comment more on the municipal responsibility, that'd be great. But I'm curious to hear from all of you about about both sides.
I think the only thing I would add about the municipal relationship is I agree. Close relationships are important. Understanding what their priorities are, where their challenges may be in helping with housing. We're fortunate, all 4 towns on the island have year-round housing as their #1 challenge and commitment. And I have found that the planning director will contact me if there are funding sources they think might be helpful that we might be able to partner with. They give to our down payment program. But the other thing is tax assessments for our homeowners. And we are eligible for tax deferment or rebate. What am I trying to say? We don't pay taxes on the properties we own until we sell the houses on them. And then we work with the assessors, and they look at what is the limitation on the resale value of that house, and they assess it accordingly, not to what its market value might be, but what its actual resale potential is. So that's important too, to have those conversations about how they can benefit and keep houses affordable as well. That's the only thing I'd add to that. And for the private sector, I just quickly say that banks are so important because they need to be financing these properties that have restrictions on them, and that can be a challenge. And so we talk with all of our local banks and let them know when we've got a program that may be gearing up and what to expect from people coming to look for mortgage financing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Susan, how about you? What have you seen as working particularly well with the private and private sector and or municipalities?
We have found that some of the in the private sector, that people that know about the program, either a family member used it or casually, that they have been willing to discount land for us. So we haven't really gone out and, like all of our contractors, we typically in a regular world, we do a spaghetti supper for our homeowners and have raffles and all this kind, no, not raffles, we have drawings and stuff like that, home ownership kind of stuff for them to all come together, whether they built 30 years ago or they built or they're building right now, to sort of keep the conversation going with them. But, you know, the private sector, they, you know, of course we try to be good with the CEOs of all the towns that we work in and keep them right up to date, and the managers or the council, whatever the town goes by, but to keep everybody informed. And we do see the CEOs out there a lot right through the progress. They really like how good we build our homes. We go, you know, by the highest standard and that kind of stuff, but we don't really address too much on the private sector. I don't know if that will change with this newest program or not, but we don't really do an awfully lot. It's probably an untapped resource that, because we're a nonprofit, nobody has the time to actually look into it and do it.
That's a thing for sure. Dan, how about you?
Yeah, again, I feel like I'm speaking to a very specific region and a very specific town within that region. So my experience might be very different than everybody else's. Because we're not doing builds as much, the private sector hasn't really been a predominant like player in the games of the programs that we're looking to put into play. However, municipalities, it's really important their buy-in in our region. You know, we've got 4 different municipalities that are within our region supporting Living 80K as a part of our funding sources, because they want to be educated and they want to understand. We're just in a lot of small communities, small staff sizes. And so a lot of it, I feel like there's programming that we as a not-for-profit can pull that lever. And then there's also the sort of legislative and zoning interventions that town governments will have to enact to, to dovetail within this program. And so part of it is an education. A lot of the folks that are elected to our town councils and committees are our local business owners, our local folks like you and I, and they see this problem and it looks like this massive thing that they can't undertake. And part of it for me is just keeping everybody calm and saying, hey, let's break this down. Stuff on the national stage or what's going as a national trend, throw that away. You can't do anything about it, and breaking it down into more simplistic terms to help them, when they're looking towards legislation or zoning or things, levers that are available to them. They've had a full-time paid person that looked into that and put it together in a dossier to make it easier to digest.
Thanks, Dan. All right, well, as we approach 1:30, I just want to give all of you the opportunity to share one more piece of advice or experience that you may not have had an opportunity to share so far. Any last parting thoughts?
I would just say that it's been said throughout the conversation, but I wanted to call it out specifically that it's so important to keep a good relationship with the people who are participating in your program, not just the donors, but and the partners, but the people who are buying or renting the housing. And that relationship both is wonderful when you're out in the community. I get hugs from people I've worked with because it means so much for them to have this home, but also it's important for any of the restrictions you have on the properties. It just continues a successful relationship with the homeowners. It's satisfying and it's important.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks. Yeah. Others, last words?
Yeah, I think I just want to build on what Marla was saying. I think those individual relationships are like really, they give you a lot of satisfaction. And I know from our funders and investors, those are the stories they like to hear as well. So I think the storytelling part of what everyone's doing is really important. We're fortunate to have a really strong communications team here, and we can put together some nice materials that we share with our investors, and then we trot them out for other groups to sort of show them what's going on and capture testimonials. But that is, you know, I was thinking of that when we were talking about data. I think data is important, but it's really that like the anecdotes in each community are equally meaningful and sometimes tell you a lot more than all, and sometimes they tell you a story and then you go look for the data and you see, yep, the data supports that story. So I think it's, they often are kind of on the same page, but the anecdotes are a lot more fun than the numbers.
Susan, any last words?
Well, there's a great need and just keep trying, I guess, is my great words. I do agree with I think probably everybody that keeping in touch with your homeowners is important for so many different reasons. Sometimes you don't know you have a problem until somebody's actually gone through the whole process and lived it. And then sometimes they can come back to you so you can tweak things. I don't have a lot of funds for advertising, so word of mouth is pretty much what I have. And I think that most of these programs are the same way. It's not that they don't, there's not a lot of people that would love to participate in them that don't have any idea that they even exist. I often get, how come you don't have huge waiting lists? Well, a lot of people don't know that they're out there, that the program's there. So keeping in touch with people. It's another reason that we do spaghetti suppers and have people come eat free food is, you know, they tell us that kind of stuff and just makes it more visible. The good and the bad.
I'm a major proponent of food at meetings. I fully support your spaghetti supper. And Dan, how about you wrapping us up?
Yeah, first off, just want to thank Northern Forest Center for putting this on and for all of you for sitting in on this. This is incredible what you do out in the community, whether you're in the not-for-profit world, for-profit, legislative side, whatever it is you do, you're doing the right thing by being here. And honestly, I feel like most of my life is driven by idioms. So, you know, it might be cheesy, but, you know, do with what you can with what you've got where you're at. You know, start now. Don't wait until the time is perfect, because as we know in life, that is never the case. And if not you, who? You know, I think a lot of times, and this is probably an outdated expression, but there's too many chiefs and not enough Indians. You know, get on the ground floor, start doing the work, start doing the homework, read that passage, you know, and take on a leadership role. It's really easy with something as convoluted and complex and nebulous as housing to just put it off as something that's out of your control. And so keep at it.
Thank you all. Isabella, will you put up our final parting slide? So once again, thank you all so much for being here. I've loved this conversation and I'm really excited about what how we're going to integrate it into the work the center's doing and to seeing more examples of how your programs are working across the region. And I know people are super grateful for it. So you will all participants will be receiving a follow-up email with a survey about how this went and links to resources and the recording. We also highly encourage you to sign up for our July webinar about recreation on private lands, which is pretty unique in the Northeast, that most of the land on which people are running or riding bikes or birding or whatever they might be doing are actually private lands. And that introduces a whole scope of challenges that aren't present in places where there's a lot of public lands on which that happens. So we know there's already a lot of interest in that topic and are excited to have some folks who are very deeply involved in making that private land recreation stuff work. So thank you to my colleagues, Leslie Carrison, Isabella Bronson, Amy Scott, and of course, Laurel Will for being here today. Want to acknowledge USDA Rural Development for its support of this work and in addition to others. And again, thank you all for being here and enjoy your day.